Assalamualaikum, my name is Arfat and welcome to a brand new video. Today I'd like to share with you bits and pieces from the upcoming paper that I will publish inshallah ta'ala. And this is regarding Genesis 1 to 11, okay, mostly known as the Primeval Story or the Primeval History, the creation of the world. And so the book of Genesis is divided into 4 or 5 or 6 even different cycles. But the 4 major sections of the book of Genesis is the first one, that is the primeval story or the primeval history, and that is from Genesis 1 to 11:25. Some scholars divided these two, this very first section, into 2 parts, and the first part goes from Genesis 1 to 6:8, and that is about the creation of the world. And then from Genesis 6:9 to 11:26, and that is to talk about the Noah cycle, okay, the beginning of Noah. The book of Genesis 5 and 6 speaks a little bit about the genealogy of Noah, etc. And so will also be the approach that I'll take in my upcoming paper, inshallah ta'ala. Now, but just to give you a brief rundown about the book of Genesis, which I think is one of the most important book in the Bible as a whole, and that we should pay a lot of attention, especially to the Pentateuch or the Hexateuch. In my upcoming paper, I would argue for the Hexateuch instead of the Pentateuch, because I believe the Deuteronomistic history is spread out all the way to the book of Judges. But I understand that this is somewhat a minority opinion, but I think this, according to what I've researched and so far, I think this is the more correct opinion, even though this is a minor opinion amongst the scholarly consensus. But anyway, that's besides the point. In my upcoming paper, I divide the book of Genesis into 4 parts, just for convenience sake. Even though we can divide it into more parts, like for example the Isaac cycle, the Jacob cycle, the Joseph cycle, so on and so forth, the Noah cycle even, and that is what John Buxma and Brent Petrie had done in their introduction to the Old Testament. But I've decided not to follow them. I've decided to follow other scholars like Bill Arnold, for example, Christine Hayes, John J. Collins. But that doesn't mean that John Buxma and his camp are incorrect. But just for convenience sake, I divide it into 4 major sections. And I try not to go into many subsections because that will make it a more complicated discussion. Because I'm aiming my paper towards like just to present this, even though it has been presented by majority of scholarly works out there, but people who doesn't want to go through the literature, 200-300 pages literature, they can just go to my paper, as well as a lot of other papers have been published on this. And so I divide Genesis into 4 major sections, and that is the primeval story or the primeval history, and that is from Genesis 1 to 11:26, okay, 1 to 11:26, and then the first patriarch from 11:26 to 25:18, and then I introduce the Jacob cycle. Remember, I do not have the Isaac cycle. In 25:19 to 36:43, and that is the Jacob cycle. And then the Joseph cycle, okay, from 37:1 all the way to the end of the book. The Joseph cycle is very interesting because there are many different literary themes. Now, in my upcoming paper, I do not actually go into details about these literary themes and things like that, because that would be about the documentary hypothesis. Another paper which I'm working on, I'm still at the research stage, but inshallah I'll publish that by the end of this year. Now, I also talk about doublets, Okay, the two accounts of Abraham attempting to pass his wife as his sister. Okay, this is from Genesis 12:10 to 20. 20 cross-referencing with 21 to 18. The two accounts of Isaac attempting to pass his wife as his sister. Okay, which is Genesis 26 1 to 11. Two accounts of God making covenant with Abraham, okay, which is chapter 15 and chapter 17 of the book of Genesis. Two accounts of how Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Okay, and this is Genesis 32 23 to 33, cross-referencing with 35 9 to 15. Now, I also discuss about the creation story, okay, the creation account, which is parallel to the Babylonian epic called Enuma Elish. The story of Adam and Eve's sin, which is similar to the epic of Gilgamesh, and then the flood narrative of Noah, okay, which is Atrahasis, the Mesopotamian flood narrative. Now, the creation table, I also described this in my paper. Remember, I didn't bring anything new. Okay, a lot of the research I've uncovered from introduction to the book of Genesis, as well as from the Jewish study Bible, okay, Hebrew study, but Jewish study Bible. Now, the creation table, just to describe here a little bit, and that is, now in day one, this is the first creation story. Okay, in day one, light was created. Okay, and in day two, the sky was created, and the book of Genesis says that this is the water above and the waters below. And in day three, the land and plants were created. Okay, now day one is somehow parallel to day four, or enhance it, and that is because there is light. Okay, and so what causes light? That is the sun, the moon, and the stars. Okay, and day two is expanded in day five, because in day two it talks about the waters above and the waters below. The waters above like birds, okay, birds fill up the sky, and the waters below fishes. So birds and fishes were created in day five. Okay, and in day three we have land and plants being created, and so it is enhanced in day six, because we have land, and so God created land animals in day six, and then humans also in day six to roam the land, for example. And then obviously the day seven is the Shabbat, the Sabbath. Okay, I also look at several translations. Richard Elliot Friedman's translation, the Jewish Study Bible translation, and also the NKJV. Now the NKJV translation and the other translations are very different. And so this is actually an interesting thing which I also looked at, but not necessarily go into details in my paper, because that would make it that would take another paper to dedicate a topic like that, which I will look at the NIV and as well as the NRSV as well. But in my paper, I predominantly follow the JPS translation, because that is the more widely popular translation. That doesn't make it correct though, because I believe that in some points the Elliot Friedman translation is actually much superior, but that's beside the point. I also made several notes, not necessarily going into details, but in Genesis 1:5, okay, God called the light day and darkness night. Okay, God called the light day and the darkness night. But how can there be separation of day and night, okay, when the sun is yet to be created? Okay, because if you look at the creation table which I've just described to you, day one there was light, but day four the sun was only created in day four. And so how can there be light when there was no sun at all? So this is something that I go through as well in my paper. In Genesis 1:7, the waters above refers to the clouds. Okay, and I also noted in the ancient world, they did not know that the clouds were a result of evaporation. Okay, we go into a bit of science here, because in the ancient world, especially we found this in Paul as well, they thought that the heavens, okay, is actually like in the clouds, okay, because there are many, as well as the authors of the gospel, okay, Jesus will come down on the clouds of heaven, okay, the Son of Man, actually, the phrase that is being used. In Genesis 1:9, the gatherings of waters in one place so that land may be visible shows that the concept of space or planets did not exist in the ancient world. Okay, the sky were believed to be the heavens. Okay, this is also an enhancement of Genesis 1:7, which I've explained earlier. In Genesis 1:17, I noted that the lesser light is probably the moon. But then again, this is when I go through by because God created the bigger light, okay, and the lesser light, and the lesser light is probably the moon. But the moon did not produce its own light. We know this from science, modern science as well. In Genesis 1:26, God created man to rule the earth, okay, or to be dominant of it. And then 1:28, the purpose of man is to reproduce and fill the earth. Now, in the first creation story of Genesis, chapter 1, and there are two creation stories in Genesis, by the way, chapter 1 and chapter 2. In the creation story of chapter 1, which we can attribute to the priestly source. Again, I do not go through the documentary hypothesis, if you do need to know a little bit about the documentary hypothesis before you read my paper, inshallah. But the Yahweh source, which is more anthropomorphic, can be attributed to the second creation story, because that shows that is more people or human centric, whereas the first creation story, it is more like mysterious in a way, and so that is what the priestly source mostly can be attributed. Now, just to give a little bit summary about the documentary hypothesis here, the Yahweh source was probably the earlier source. The reason why for thinking this, that's because it has more parallels with the Mesopotamian epics, the Babylonian epics, whereby God is portrayed as more anthropomorphic. Okay, this is one of the reasons why, not the major reason. There are many reasons actually, but this is one of the reasons why. Now, later on, the priestly source, okay, they do not believe, okay, for whatever reason we do not need to get into, they do not believe that God is anthropomorphic. Okay, God is this divine being that is separated from the human world. He doesn't come down and things like that. So the priestly source or the later redactor of the priestly source, they disagree with this concept of an anthropomorphic God or anthropomorphism, and so they portray God as this mysterious divine being that no one knows what he looks like and things like that. The Yahweh source is more anthropomorphic, like I said. So, for example, Moses saw the back of God, okay, and God was there at Mount Sinai, and so these are the sources that we can attribute to the Yahwehs, okay, or the Yahweh, the Yahweh source. Again, we're not going to too much detail here. All right. The next part of my paper is I actually compare the creation stories, like I've said, but just to give you a brief rundown, in the first creation story, light was created first, okay, but in the second creation story, human beings were created first. In the first creation story, humans were created simultaneously, meaning man, woman, and things like that. But in the second creation story, Adam, okay, followed by Eve were created, okay, And because in the second creation story we have Adam being lonely, and God created animals for Adam and things like that, but Adam wasn't satisfied. His loneliness couldn't be substantiated, for example, couldn't be reduced, and so God put Adam to sleep, for example, and then he removed the ribs from Adam, and then he created Eve from the ribs of Adam, and then Adam woke up and was satisfied. But then obviously Adam later on blamed Eve for eating for giving him the forbidden fruit. Now in the first creation story, there was too much water in the creation. That's why God had to separate the waters from above to waters from below, because there was too much water in a sense. Okay, and in the second creation story, there was too little water. In fact, there was not enough water even. Now, if we attribute the Yahweh source to be the earlier source, then one of the reasons for my thinking that the Yahweh source probably originated in Mesopotamia, even though, again, this is a minority opinion, but that is because back then in the past, probably there was a drought or something like that, and so probably in southern Mesopotamia, okay, southern Iraq, for example, whereby there's the oasis Euphrates and Tigris were in northern Iraq. Don't forget that. But in southern Iraq, for example, whereby there's the barren desert and things like that, and so the Yahwehs or the Jahwehs redactor, for example, they were suffering and things like that because of too lack of water, and so but that is why they probably have the priestly source in front of them, or the Elohim source. But then again, this is a bit problematic if we go into this way, because the Yahweh source was probably a first source, and so if we attribute the Yahweh source to have or the redactor to have access to all the other sources, it could probably mean that the redactor have all these other sources in front of him. It is similar to the gospel, okay, the Q documents and things like that. Now, man was created in the image of God. Okay, that is the first creation stories, attributed probably to the Elohis and the priestly source. But in the second creation story, man was created of dust. Okay, there's nowhere mentioned that man was created in the image of God. Now, there are also some other opinions that flip it around, that man was created in the image of God. This is probably an anthropomorphic source, so it is definitely the Yahweh source. Okay, and that man was created of dust. Okay? It is probably a priestly or the Elohim source. And I think this is a more correct opinion, and this is the opinion that I actually took. Even though we have the first creation story in chapter 1, but that doesn't mean that we should always say that, oh, they come from the priestly source, all of them. And so I think if we deny any anthropomorphic representation of God, and we are consistent, then we should attribute this to the priestly source. And any anthropomorphic depiction of God, for example, man was created in the image of God, then we can attribute it to the Yahweh's source if we are consistent in our approach. But then again, it is very difficult to tell between the two. It is very difficult to tell, because there are also other factors that underlies this. Because the Elohim source, okay, they use God name to refer to as Elohim, whereas the Yahweh source, they use Yahweh, the tetragrammaton, Yod-He, Vod-He, in English depicted as YHWH. Now, in the first creation story, God made man to be holy. Okay, but in the second creation story, man was trying so hard to be holy, okay, or trying to be like the image of God, and this leads to the what we call it, the Satan, okay, or the devil, in Eden, okay, whereby the forbidden fruit was depicted to be anyone who ate the forbidden fruit will have like divine powers, for example. Okay, and so Eve ate from the fruit, and then she gave it to Adam, and then their eyes were open, and then they got aware that they were naked, for example. And then we have an anthropomorphic depiction of God, like God doesn't know, okay, where Adam and Eve were hiding. And God doesn't know that Adam and Eve ate from the fruit. Now, there are many interpretations to this, and I believe the incorrect interpretation of this is that to say that God is, he doesn't have knowledge, and that is why he asked Adam and Eve, where are you hiding? But I think this is an incorrect interpretation. This verse should be taken as rhetorical, because if we are consistent in our approach to the Torah, for example, the Tanakh, God has knowledge, a lot of knowledge. Okay, and so this is a rhetorical question that God probably asked. But if we were to take the more radical interpretation, is that God is he doesn't have a lot of knowledge, and that is why he doesn't know that he doesn't know where Adam and Eve were hiding, and he doesn't know whether they ate from the tree or not. Because Adam and Eve, before this, in the second creation story, this is not mentioned in the first creation story. In the second creation story, once they ate the forbidden fruit, then they only became aware of their nakedness. Before this, their eyes were not open, in a sense. Okay, and this is also why I believe that this interpretation is not literal, but it is rhetorical. So because their eyes were probably open, okay, but they are not aware that they are naked because their eyes have not been open, or it has not been revealed to them, in a sense. Okay. In my paper, inshallah, I also go through the comparison between a few of the other portions, which I do not have the time to go through in this video. In Genesis 6, God took wives from man's woman. Okay, again, this can be attributed to the Yahweh's source, because it's a bit anthropomorphic. And I also speak about the contradictions in the flood. For example, in Genesis 7:1-23, the flood is there are two accounts of the flood. Genesis 7:1-24. For example, in 7:12, 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, the flood lasted for 40 days and 40 nights. But in Genesis 7:24, the flood lasted for 150 days. Okay, and then God remembered Noah in Genesis 8:1. Again, this is a bit difficult to take this as rhetorical, okay, or allegorical, because God remembered Noah. Okay, this phrase is very strong. It means that God forgot. And so I attributed this narrative to the Yahwehs because it is anthropomorphic. Humans forget, God doesn't forget, and this is not aligned with the priestly source. And then very important point to pay attention to is Genesis 8:6. Okay, Genesis chapter 8 verse 6, and 7:24-8:5. Okay, 7:24-8:5 was narrating about the flood that occurs for 150 days. Okay, and in 8:5, the narrative is about a flood that occurs for 40 days. Okay, I'm talking about the narrative. I'm not talking about whether the flood lasted for 40 days or 150 days. The reason why I brought this up, Genesis 7:24-8:6, it is important because these are the first instances, okay, that we know of, obviously, of whereby the Yahweh source and the priestly source have been interwoven with one another. Okay, because from Genesis 7:24-8:5, this is mostly attributed to the Yahweh source. Okay, And then in 8586, it speaks, the narrative suddenly changed. Okay, and it is as if the narrative was talking about the flood that lasted for 40 days all along. So this is a very interesting point to note. And again, I talk about this in my paper, inshallah. Now, also lastly, the contradictions on the clean animals. Now, I do not believe that the translation clean and unclean animals is correct, because if you look at the narrative, it is about Noah. Once the flood subsides, he sacrificed these animals. And so clean and unclean is an ambiguous phrase to use, and the JBS probably got this translation incorrect, and this is when the translation of Elliot Friedman is actually superior, in my opinion. And it should be pure and impure. That is the translation, because only the pure animals were advised to be sacrificed at the ark. Okay. And so, again, the contradictions, cross-referencing with chapter 7, verse 2, okay, from 9:11 to 20, 6:19, 20. Sorry, in 6:19, 20, two pairs of clean and unclean animals, okay, or pure and impure animals. However, in Genesis 7, verse 2. Noah was instructed to collect about 7 pairs of pure animals, and unpure animals or impure animals, only about 2 pairs of them. And so this is a contradiction in the narrative. And last but not least, for now, in my paper, I also spoke about God smelled the offerings. Okay, that Noah gave, the offerings of the pure animals, okay, the clean animals. Again, we can attribute this to the priestly source because it is anthropomorphic. It is an anthropomorphic depiction of God. God smelled the offerings and planned not to destroy man again, because men's minds are full of evil from their youth. And then God regretted sending the flood. These are all humans' depictions and human thinking and human notions. And again, the priestly source is against this, because there's a wide range of argument up there between the Yahweh source and the Elohim source and the priestly source and the Deuteronomistic historian source. But the priestly source and the Deuteronomistic the historian source, or just D, and the Elohis as well, is against, I would argue, is against anthropomorphism or anthropomorphic depiction of God. If again, this is not straightforward. Okay, there are many factors, but again, we do not need to get into this because this is again a separate discussion on documentary hypotheses and the sources, which I'm currently researching to produce a paper on that one, inshallah. Again, in my paper, I also go through the repetitions, okay, in Genesis 9, 8 to 11, cross-referencing with 9, 12 to 15. And then Noah became drunk in 9:20, 21, and then he was naked in 9:22, 23 as well. And then this is also when we have the Yahweh source or the J source. Okay, the Lord came down to look at the Tower of Babel. Okay, and then God confuses people, okay, because human beings spoke the same language. And so God wanted to confuse people, and so he made them speak different languages, and so they don't understand one another. And this is Genesis 11, 6, 7. And so that is what my paper actually spoke about Genesis 1 to 11:26. Now, obviously, there are references in my paper made. For example, when in the first part of my paper, I introduced the different books of Genesis, or the different divisions that scholars had done to the book of Genesis. For example, the Primeval Story or history, the first patriarch, the Isaac cycle, the Jacob cycle, the Joseph cycle. Obviously, I'll make references to that narrative in the book of Genesis. But this will be the first out of a few articles or paper that I, inshallah, will be writing this year. Probably 4 papers dedicated to the book of Genesis, following the 4 major sections or divisions that I've introduced I will be introducing in my first paper, inshallah. I'm still debating with myself whether I should actually divide it further to include the Isaac cycle, but I don't know. That is something that I'll debate with myself and to see which one is the better option. My paper is aimed towards people who are brand new in the field. That is the reason why I want to write this paper, because there's a lot of books, numerous books are being produced regarding this topic. But I understand that a lot of people doesn't have the time to go through all of this literature. And inshallah, in my paper also I'll give some really good books recommendations, and so you can refer to a list of bibliographies that I will include in my paper, inshallah ta'ala. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this video, and I'll look forward to publishing it. Inshallah ta'ala. My name is Arfat, and thank you for joining me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.